Your speaker is not working.
And they get they know that they found out somehow they try to do whatever. And so yes. Yeah.
We are recording.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
You are not on the Zoom. You have to be over here.
Yeah, you need to move over. You're right there. Now you are.
Start again. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Atlanta Authors Hybrid event. With Mother's Day tomorrow, we want to also say Happy Mother's Day to all of you who are mothers. Today we welcome Pamela Terry, author of When the Moon Turns Blue. Welcome, Pamela. It's a pleasure to have you today. She's in the back of the room. And we also have Allison Adams, who we are welcoming. She's going to moderate the discussion. Allison is the Director of Research and Scholarly Writing at Emory University's Center for Faculty Development and Excellence.
Look, sit down.
Big
The light
time.
is shining in your eye on the camera, and so it's hard to see you. There we go.
Yeah. Cut, and then we need to take two.
Yeah, you're fine.
Before we get started, a few housekeeping items for our virtual attendees. The Zoom audience members are on mute. If you have any issues during the presentation or would like to submit a question for Pamela, please use the chat function. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and we will present your questions to Pamela at that time. Also, we recommend that you change your screen view on Zoom from gallery view to speaker view so that you can see whoever is speaking rather than all the other Zoomers. And those of you in person, and I think we have gotten you all, we would ask that you please sign the attendance sheet. And it is, well, I think we got you all, and Debbie is keeping an eye on it. And we have good news for everyone. Atlanta Authors is now on Facebook. So if you are a Facebook user, sign up to learn about our upcoming author events, as well as other local author events and what our past presenters have going on. Atlanta Authors has been holding author events at the Roswell Library, the Cultural Arts Center, and virtually for the last 16 years. And the list is impressive. We want to thank Atlanta Authors Committee members, which include myself, Debbie Weiss, Deanna Smith, Marilyn Barron, Diane Stevenson, Kathy Chaffee, George Weinstein, who is with the Atlanta Writers Club, Judy Stanton, and the owner of our favorite local bookstore, the Book Miser herself, Annelle Gerson. We couldn't hold these author events without the unwavering support of the Friends of the Roswell Library and the Friends of the East Roswell Library, and we thank them as well. In addition, we are in association with Roswell Reads. That group has kept their program alive and growing for more than 18 years. Copies of When the Moon Turns Blue, as well as Pamela's earlier book, will be available for purchase in the back of the room or at Book Miser. Book Miser is located at 3822 Roswell Road in East Cobb, less than a 10-minute drive from most areas of Roswell. Those of you on Zoom can go to their website at bookmiser.net for more information. We've added their information to the chat area of your screen, so it is there as well. Her books are also available in the Fulton County Library. And now, here to introduce our author is Annelle Gerson.
You're good.
Well, thank you, Lou. And again, thank you, all of you, for the privilege of your time today. As Lou mentioned, our moderator today is Allison Adams, and she is Emory's Director of Research and Scholarly Writing in the Center for Faculty Development and Excellence. Her responsibilities are vast in her mission to provide extensive support for faculty as writers and researchers. She also coordinates events aimed to celebrate the achievements of Emory's intellectual community and presents programs and workshops at conferences and other institutions around the country on intellectual self-care for faculty. In her spare time, she also works as a freelance scholarly editor. Thank you for being here today, Allison. I'm also honored to introduce to you lifelong Southerner and storyteller, Pamela Terry. Like so many authors that Atlanta Authors has hosted, Pamela's journey to novelist was circuitous. After years as an interior designer, she started the internationally popular blog From the House of Edward, Edward being her dog, which was named one of the top 10 home blogs of the year by London's The Telegraph. Writing the blog rekindled her love of writing. Then, encouraged by none other than Georgia's beloved and terribly missed Terry Kay, as well as New York Times bestselling author Patty Callahan Henry, she completed her first novel and signed with the second agent she contacted, an agent who then in only 10 days sold the book to Random House. Wow. Yes, wow. That book, The Sweet Taste of Muscadines, came out in 2021. To quote Book Page's review, The Sweet Taste of Muscadines is a mashup of fried green tomatoes, and you can't go home again with a sprinkling of William Faulkner. I think you will all agree. When your debut novel is compared to Fanny Flagg, Thomas Wolfe, and William Faulkner, that says something. Her second book, When the Moon Turns Blue, was released in 2022. New York Times bestselling author Sarah Addison Allen says, wise, exquisitely written, and full of heart, this smart, quirky novel proves Pamela Terry is a Southern powerhouse. Ladies, gentlemen, I present Pamela Terry in conversation with Allison Adams.
Thank you. Scoot forward, you can get the light up.
Oh, well.
There you
Is that better?
go. Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Oh, that's good. Is it on? Is this one on?
Flip it up.
Flip it up. There we go. Yes, there we go.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you to the Roswell Friends of the Library and the city, and to Annelle and Bookmiser for having us. This is really a treat.
It's fine, yeah.
And
Although I
thank
didn't
you.
recognize that introduction, that seems,
That seems
a
a
little kind of,
So we're gonna start with the reading.
Okay, all right.
So I,
My glasses on.
Helen said, what should I read? And I said, you should
You
decide.
should read. This sort of sets up, the direction the story went in, when I didn't really know it was going to. Linda and her husband Megan are coming home from a funeral of Megan's sister's husband. And they're not exactly getting along that well, so I'll just pick it up here. Linda turned to stare out the window. They were passing the park, and as if on cue, the stone statue stood as it always did, impassive and defiant, at the nexus of a network of red brick sidewalks lined with azaleas. This morning it was the same color as the air. She blamed the statue. It had sat in Griffin Park for so long, most of the people in town hardly saw it anymore. At least the white people didn't, and being white, Glenda had barely looked at it ever. It might as well have been one of the oak trees that shared the same plot of land. She could honestly say she hadn't even known the name of the man sitting on the horse at the top of that stone cliff before all this started a year ago. But now she did, and so did most of the people in Wesley, many falling like landslide rocks on either side of the dividing line of opinion that, though invisible, was as sharp as a soldier's sword. The statue belonged to Old Man Griffin, so really, he was the one she should like. Everyone called him that. Now that he was approaching the home stretch of his 80s, that appellation fit a little bit better than it had in decades past, but then it had always had more to do with personality than age. His house sat atop a hill directly across the street from the park that bore his family name, behind the cold black fingers of a Gothic iron fence, hidden by a thicket of loblolly pine. It had been raining that night in 1916 when the county voted to put the road through the Griffin property. And the group of county commissioners who ventured out to the house after the decisive meeting had done so with great reluctance, not knowing exactly what Old Man Griffin's father, Lucius, would say or do about the decision, but each willing to bet that it wouldn't be good. The rain had knotted itself into a thunderstorm by the time Mary Griffin ushered them into the study where her husband sat at his carved oak desk, staring at them evenly behind long, tinted fingers. The air was violet with the smoke curling up from his cigar. Not daring to drip rainwater on any of Mary's silk damask sofas and chairs, the men had stood awkwardly around the dimly lit room, trying hard not to let their eyes wander to the small door at the left of the fireplace where, as some of them heard, and a few of them knew, the clean white accoutrements of the clan was carefully folded. The men explained their case to Lucius. The town is growing and the road is essential. We've really no other choice. We'll be able to pay you a little, of course. But Lucius remained silent, rain battering the windows all the while, and Mary in the hall with her ear to the door. When they finished their news, it had been underscored with a clap of thunder that rattled a little Loge in the dining room next door. In the end, they all wondered how they'd gotten off so easy. All Lucius Griffin wanted in exchange for his land was to build a new park on the remaining field on the other side of the new road. A park he would create and his family would maintain, and in which he would erect a statue to the Confederate General Henry Benning, a former judge on Georgia's Supreme Court and an old friend of Lucius's much revered father, Hiram. Well, nobody had any problem with that. The brick sidewalks were laid around the oaks while Meridian Street was being extended, and Griffin Park opened to balloon-filled skies on the 4th of July in 1918. It had only taken a century for people to realize who Henry Benning really was, and now that they knew, over half of them wanted him gone, and they wanted him gone before the 100-year celebration that Old Man Griffin was planning for the summer.
So I remember reading a version of that in an early draft of your manuscript as you were working on it.
And you were worried.
I was like, boy, oh boy. What are you doing? What have you gotten yourself into? And I think I probably said that to you at the time, and I think your answer was, I don't know.
I don't know.
So my first question to you is, do you know now?
What I was doing then?
Right. What made you want to tackle these hard subjects? And there's so many other ways you could have come at race and history. Why this story?
Well, the easy answer is I never write from an agenda or where I know where I'm going. I start with character. And to be honest, the character of Linda, which is a main character in that book, she was just a side, she was just a appendage of her husband, which was what she had been all her life. But as soon as she got on the page, she wasn't. And I was following along with Linda in that car, and I looked over and I saw that statue, just like she did. And that's when it took off. And this was written, this book was written after, or but still, you know, with the reverberations of the George Floyd turmoil going on. And, you know, I was raised in the South. There's been a Confederate statue. I could find one easy growing up. And you know, from an early age, I've been a listener, and I was listening to people in my own community and listening to people, you know, friends and neighbors and relatives, and it all went into that book. And once she saw the statue, I couldn't unsee it. Now, I didn't know what was going to happen to it. That was a surprise. That was one of those moments when I sat back and went, oh, you know, but I have a lot of those.
I know it sounds like I'm totally schizophrenic, but that's what being a writer is.
I'm not gonna ask you too many more questions about the developments in the novel because spoilers. But I do want to ask, you're such a funny writer. I mean, that is, I was privileged to read that first novel Muscadines in complete first draft.
Yeah.
And
But you didn't know I was writing.
hooted my way through it. Yeah, and I remember saying to you, this is brilliant, it's wonderful, it's gonna get published and it's gonna take years because that's how it happens, and I was very wrong. But I do wanna ask you about humor, and how do you know that something that you are doing, that you are saying or writing is funny?
Well, life is funny.
Where does that come from? What's the
Life
law?
is funny. I mean, there's not a day goes by that I go out of my house at least, that I don't see something that's not meant to be funny, but that is. And I think if you grow up in the South and you have relatives, you know what's, I mean, come on, it just is. And I don't know how it happens, but it bleeds into my work, and I just hear it. You know, I had lunch not long ago with a lady who's wanting to be a writer, and I was encouraging her, you know, to write and just, you know, get your story down on paper, which I would encourage anybody to do. And she said, well, I haven't read your books, I don't want to. And I said, well, okay. And she said, I'm afraid I'll copy you. And I said, you won't copy me. You might copy my subject matter, but you won't copy my voice, because everybody has their own voice and you hear it. And what I hear is just funny. And it you know, it's, I don't necessarily think of it as a talent. When I write dialogue, I'm usually just taking dictation. I had so much fun in Muscadines writing the character of Abigail. And I did not study over her at all. I just saw her, and when she opened her mouth, I was like, slow down. And it just comes out.
Well, I would beg to differ. I think it is a talent because not everything that you hear in the world that is funny translates well to the page.
Yeah.
Not everybody can do that. And that's what I'm interested in with your
How I do it?
process.
I can't answer. I don't know. I mean, I was talking to my editor. I was in the middle of my third book right now, and it's. I was talking to her about that, and she said at one point, "Don't kill off your character." And I was like, "Well, it's my business." She said, "No, you just don't." She said, "Because you write with humor, and it's gonna slap people if you don't."
Oh, it will.
Yeah, it's like bait and switch. Yeah, you don't be carrying. Such power. But I understand what she means. And I told her, I said, you know, even when I'm writing about tough subjects, there is humor. I went a couple of nights ago to see the new movie, which I encourage you all to see, Wildcat, which is the story of Flannery O'Connor. And it's not really her life story, but it's the story of her art. And it depicts her so many different times sitting in a waiting room or at a bus station, and she's watching people. And all of a sudden they morph into a character. And if you've read Flannery O'Connor, you know her stories are very dark, but they're also very funny. And I think we have to admit that's what life is. It you know, woe to the person who can't see people. And when in Rome, do as you've done and never do. Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. It's, you know, what was the line? Go to hell, you old warthog.
Go back to hell you
Yeah,
come from.
yeah. And I mean, that story is brilliant, but it's also, and it's heart-rending, but it's also fun. So that's what life is.
So Pamela, you came to novel writing, as we heard in the lovely introduction. You came to novel writing late as a second career, possibly a third.
Yeah.
How did that make things different for you as an author?
Well, it's been a bit of a shock that it happened so quickly. Allison will tell you, but I was with her in Shetland, right? The Shetland Islands were both knitters, and we had gone on a
Knitting and hiking tour.
which is, most people may not think that goes together, but it does. When my editor had just sent the book out, and Alice was like, "Oh, this is so great, but it's gonna take a while." And when I came home, it basically had sold, and so it was a bit of a shock. I wasn't really expecting that to happen. Part of it, I had a hard time dealing with the fact that I didn't pay the kind of dues a lot of young writers do, because they get rejected so much. And I don't think that had anything to do with my age, but I don't know how to put this. It didn't rattle me, I didn't worry about it. It didn't define me. Whether or not I got published would not have defined me. And I remember telling Terry Kay the night he so generously asked to read some of my stuff, and I told him, I told him I really don't care if I'm published. I just want to write a book that I feel proud of. And he read some of them and said, "No, you need to be published." And at the time, I didn't think that was any kind of a validation that I actually needed, but I found that it was nice. And it was nice. And it was nice to know that other people were reading your work and you got to talk to them, and what they took from it was not necessarily what you had meant to put in there, but they saw something you didn't see. It took a life on of its own, and that was very meaningful. But I don't think if it hadn't have happened, I don't think I would have continued to write. I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, to follow on that, was your second novel harder than the first?
Yes, it was harder. And my third novel was harder than that. And I think part of it is because I wrote that first novel with no one knowing that. You don't really tell people you're writing a novel because you just don't. And because then they'll say, "How's the novel going?" So I really didn't tell anybody. I don't think you knew. Did you know?
That you were writing your first one?
Yeah.
I didn't know until you put the full manuscript in my hands.
Yeah. And the second one, I was really lucky that the first one got some really good reviews and some attention. And so when you sit down to write the second one, what I saw were all these people in an office in New York waiting on it.
Well, and you have the editor saying, "Don't give up that." I mean,
Right.
so
Right.
it changes you. a little
It
bit.
does change you. And it's been a struggle to put all those voices out of my head and get back to the place where it's just me and the page. And I think that's what they don't tell you about, well, I think Anne Lamott tells you, but nobody else tells you about being published, is that there are other things that go with it. And you do feel this level of expectation that you didn't feel before. And if you can't get that out of your head, it can be a real stumbling block.
Right.
So, and I work on that every day.
I mean, you have to kind of take yourself back to that place
You
where
do.
you're writing from a state of just pure pleasure of
You
the
do.
story.
And I'm really lucky, and I have an editor who understands that and who doesn't want me to listen to any of that. And she, I've blown past a couple of deadlines, and she said, "Look, I don't care about the deadline. I just want you to write a book that you want to write." So I try to get all those voices out of me. It's hard. Harder than it was when I was just going to my library writing. Didn't think anybody would ever read
Inside your
it.
head.
Inside my head. I still live inside my head.
But as you know, I think a lot in my professional life about
writing and the processes and the practices and the habits that really help support that. Excursions into your own imagination. So I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about your routines and practices and habits as a writer. You mentioned going to the library.
Yeah, I've been writing a lot of this book recently at home, which is unusual for me. I've got a great office and I've got a dog that'll sleep under my chair and I've got all the accoutrements of a really great place to write. But often I find that I focus better when I can write. I go to the library. I'm lucky I live, about a mile and a half from the library. It's a great library. And I go there and write. And sometimes when I'm at home, I notice there's a dust under the chair, or what am I going to cook for dinner, or where the dog's barking. So I'll go there to write. I like the quiet. I like being around books. You're in a corner where you look around and you think, well, other people have done it, so I can do it. And I do like that. I try not to listen to too much news or look on social media too much and get those voices. I'm careful I try to be careful what I put in my head, because it stays and it rattles around. So.
And how many hours a day are you?
I'm good at about 4 hours a day. I like to get up and have breakfast and just basic.
Process, yes.
The process. I like to get up and have breakfast, check my email, and if I'm right at home, I'll just go to my office and close the door. And I'm good for about 4 hours. If I go to the library, I usually get there at 12:30 or 1 and write till dinner, 5 or 6. After that, I start getting obsessive and
Diminishing returns.
diminishing returns. And I like to stop at a spot where things are going really well. And it's sort of counterintuitive, but that way I know when I come back the next day, I can just pick up and go.
Right.
If I stop where there's a knot, then it's harder the next day. So I like to write through that knot before I stop.
And when you write, are the stories and the prose springing fully formed from your head, like Athena from the head of Zeus? Or
Well, no,
how do you work through your prose?
Yeah, I don't like to hear writers necessarily talk about the muse, but I have to admit she exists. When I wrote my first book, I was in the middle of another book, and I was cooking dinner one night, and the first line of Muscadine just went through my head like the news crawl on the bottom of CNN. And I sat down and I went and wrote it, and wrote the whole prologue. And when my husband's a songwriter, and we came in from the studio that night, I was back to cooking, and I said, read that and see if you think it's anything. And he went, yeah, I think this is something. So, and through all of the edits and everything, that did not change. But the majority of what I do is hard work. And I think I mentioned Anne a lot a few minutes ago. She says, and it's so true, that if you don't think you can do it, imagine a small rectangle on your page and just commit yourself to filling that little small rectangle. But what she doesn't say is that it's while you're filling that small rectangle that the ideas come.
Well, while you're cooking dinner.
Yeah, well, that's true too, but that's what I was talking about, the muse. That's fairy dust. It's when you're slogging it out and you don't think you have anything and you committed to, I'm going to write for an hour no matter what. It's during that process that the ideas come, and when you're worried about it, they don't. So it's the work brings the muse. She doesn't show up. She never did. Yeah. I've had some things happen in both books. Like I said a few minutes ago, something happened that I wasn't expecting and changed the whole course of the book. But that came after a long day. And all of a sudden I said, oh, where did that come from?
You said something to me before we started. You said that your stories really come out of characters.
They do.
Talk a little more about that, Pamela. Talk about how you keep the well filled with character and story?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I was an only child. I've been an observer for years and watched people. And I learned really early on that a lot of times what they say is one thing and what they mean is something else. And so I've always been really interested in characters. One of my favorite things to do is sit in an airport or in a shopping mall. I'm waiting on my husband for free to meet a certain place, and I'll watch people and I make up backstories for them. It's like this lady doesn't know she's pregnant. This one, you know. I mean, I'm constantly doing that, and I'm just interested in all the different kinds of people. And when I start to write them, I mean, both times, with the first book and with the second, I was touring about what to write next. And Margaret Atwood always says, if you're stuck in a spot, either iron or take a walk or take a nap. And I opted for the third one. And I had just, I just lay down in bed and I saw this image of this woman sitting on the front row in a church at her husband's funeral, and she had a horrible migraine. And I thought, I'm gonna write her. And so I sat down and I started with her character, and then all of a sudden one of her best friends shows up, and it comes from character. I never sit down and say, I'm gonna write about someone returning from war, or I'm gonna write about some, you know, it comes out of character. And that just comes from observing.
And it sounds like it comes out of an image. Like you have a
Yeah.
visual that you
Yeah,
start with.
I'm a very visual writer. I see things and I just write them and I see it. I was speaking with someone earlier about the first book has a section set in Scotland, and she said it was, you know, she really loved that. And I thought, I didn't embellish. It's just what I saw. It's there. And that's true with character too. I mean, you know, don't you look at people and say, why did they choose that outfit today? You know, I mean, what did you write your book? Well, that was an accident. Also, that was my husband. That was an accident. But don't you, I mean, you know, why did they choose that color car? Why are they, those kind of things fascinate me. So it's a good thing I started writing. It gave something to do with it.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a really unfair question.
Okay.
And that is, do you have a favorite character among the community of listening that you've written?
I really loved Henry in the first book. I really wanted Henry to be my best friend or my brother. I loved him. And also I loved Abigail. She was somebody that I felt like I knew, and my heart went out to her, and she was irritating, but I loved her. I'll tell you something funny, and especially with what this book deals with, the new one. I'm usually a different person when I finish writing a book than when I start. And I can start with some preconceived notions about my own characters, but I end up having empathy for them, and I can't write them black and white.
Even making.
Even making. Yeah, but there were reasons Macon was like he was, and part of Macon didn't want to be like he was. And that's what I came to see as I wrote it. I didn't like him in the beginning, and I was going to let him have his. But it's really hard to write a full-on villain, bad person, because you get to know them so well, and none of us are black and white, and that's what I learned. I mean, there were things I wrote in that book that my editor said, you can't do this. You gotta change this. But once I get to know these characters really well, they're not black and white. Or none of us are.
Should we take a few
Sure.
audience questions? And when we start in the room, and then we'll move to Zoom. Let folks
Yeah.
know that they can pop a question into the chat.
They can.
Do we see
Don't be
Gracie
shy.
again? Just me.
Yes, I loved When the Moon Turns Blue. It was hilarious, and you know, being here in Atlanta for 20-some years, it encapsulated small town life and the Confederate statue controversy and the, Black Lives Matter, but it also, I mean, there was just so many, the Southern funeral, the ice.
There's a lot of funerals in my books, I realize.
Yeah,
that,
I mean, funerals are, and the ice storm though, really, the classic Atlanta, I'm not, this isn't Atlanta, but the classic Southern ice storm that we're not prepared for and nobody
Yeah.
knows how to deal with,
Yeah.
and somehow you put all those things together in like one day or, one week
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And it all just comes together and it's hilarious and I just couldn't stop laughing,
Thank you.
And again, the character, the old man, I mean, you
Oh,
hate
Andrew.
him, but then you kind of end up having some compassion
Yeah.
for him and Macon, you hate him, but then you're like, well,
Yeah.
he really didn't need to do, so
Yeah.
I don't know, there were just so many really.
He also kind of got his, and he.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And, and the heroes that that end up being heroes, and I don't want to spoil anything, but, yeah, I just was so entertained by the whole thing. But I am curious about your next book, and is it gonna be along the same lines or have other controversial topics going on?
Another widow. Another widow. I think Brenda all about widows.
Sorry, Pat.
That didn't sound good.
I find them really, really interesting. I find women, especially Southern women, who lived all their lives as a wife and defined by that, and all of a sudden to have that rug pulled out from under them, I think that's fascinating. So yeah, the next one after this one, I promise, but this one does. And the first line of this book is Lawrence Elliott's urn was still in the box the first night Edith was in. So,
Oh, wow.
and Anthony has been dead 50 years. So, it's I'm having fun with this one. There's some wayward children who were trying to do the best they can and failing miserably, and all through it, and Edith was trying to direct the happenings. So that's what this one's about. But it is set in the same city.
Any controversial social themes or
Not
really?
yet, we'll see.
No.
We'll see.
I'll see what I can drag
Not yet. Yeah.
Are you from a small town, or did you just take the relationships and this bigger Atlanta and bring them into a small
When
town?
I was growing up, Atlanta was, felt like it. I was born in Meridian, Mississippi, but, I was only there for 6 months, but it must have seeped in at some point. But then when I moved to Atlanta, it was sort of a smaller town than this town. And I live in Smyrna, which, there is a section of Smyrna that's considered Old Smyrna. There's enough stories in Old Smyrna that you could write a whole series. I don't know. I think the South, I mean, I haven't lived anywhere else, so maybe I'm wrong, but maybe other people could say the same thing about where they're from, but all of the South seems like a small town to me. So, our ideas sometimes are a few decades, behind. I just think we're all, it's the whole South is like small. Do we have some questions over Zoom?
No,
Okay.
no, just a few people are having trouble hearing.
Oh.
But then most of the people are not.
Yeah.
So, or it seems that they aren't. I haven't heard from them. But we are recording. It'll be on the Atlanta Authors.
Right, you can
page.
suggest that they turn on the captions on Zoom.
Oh,
There's a closed caption
okay.
function.
So you just have done that.
Oh, there you go. You can turn on the closed captions. Any other questions?
Let me see if there's some more messages. That's interesting. So somebody did say that audience questions are clear, presenters not clear.
Huh. Oh, that's not good.
It could be the microphones.
The microphones, maybe, because we don't have them. Although I have a naturally loud one.
We'll just project and maybe
Yeah.
the mic's a little further out. How about
Yeah,
that?
that's fine.
Great.
Right. That's, well,
Did I see an hand in the back? Yes, ma'am. I was, last night I went to see the production of, Kill a Mockingbird that's playing in the Fox downtown.
Yeah.
I haven't read it in a long time. My memory of it is not that it's funny. And this was the adaptation of this is very funny. I mean, there's all the drama and the trial and death and the thing, you know, all the serious topics are covered, but there's so much humor in it that I was just amazed at how that played within that perspective.
Don't you remember the scene in To Kill a Mockingbird where Scout had to dress up like a
Yeah.
potato and go
Just
to
walking
the-
down the
Yeah,
street.
and that's
Yeah.
right before the big climactic.
Yes, but that wasn't played for laughs.
It wasn't
Like,
like,
I mean, it was because she looks like a big ant.
well, in the book,
In the book, it's funny.
it's
Yeah,
funny.
but that wasn't played so much for laughs, it's just the relationships between Atticus and the kids and the other people, they're just really, I don't know, there was just so much humor in it, it so surprised me, it was good. To your point
Yeah.
about books being
I
funny
talked
and serious.
I talked to a friend this week that I've known forever, and he told me this story, and I've got to use it somewhere, but he told me the story about his mother, who, because he called to check on us because of the tornadoes that had come through. He said that they had had a tornado when he was a child, and he said that it hit their neighborhood and hit a house, just obliterated a house a couple of doors down, left theirs fine, but he said that his mother during it, you know, those things are loud, and if you've ever been through one, his mother said, his father's name was Milt, and she said, well, Milt, it can't be all that bad. They're flying planes out there. Can't you hear them? And I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, and you gotta put that somewhere. I mean, and that's just in the middle of something as horrific as the tornado, you hear a line like that. So, I mean, that's just like, you gotta listen, yeah.
Speaking of plays or movies, do you see any of your books being adapted as either?
Well, my agent does. You know, I don't know, that's a long shot. And I mean, she does have somebody that is sort of like on that, but, I don't know. I mean, if that happens, great, but I mean, it would be so different in the book, I know it would. So it wouldn't really have much to do with me.
But it really along the lines of Steel Magnolias
Oh,
or
yeah.
Fried Green Tomatoes. I mean, it just, those are
Yeah.
such great Southern movies.
Yeah.
I could totally see When the Moon Turns Blue, again, with the right characters, just being a hit.
Yeah. Well, your lips to
Your books have been translated into other
Yeah,
languages.
they have. I never will forget the day the Hebrew version of The Sweet Taste of Muscadine showed up. And I didn't know how to open it. I mean, they read from left, yeah. And I had it upside down. I was like, what? Yeah, and that's too fun. Yeah.
Do you know anything about the translators?
I don't. I know the covers have been really funny though. And we don't have any say-so on the covers, and they've been, you know, you realize that this is the Italians' view of what it was like in the South. And it was this huge plantation and this woman walking towards it, and I thought,
With a
like,
whip.
Tara, wow. Yeah. You know, they knew she's from Atlanta, and they took on with the wind. So, yeah. Alrighty. And also in, Hungary, it's grapes. It's not, they just couldn't handle muscadine.
No.
So it's grapes.
Yeah.
Sweet taste of grapes. But bless them, I'm grateful they read it.
I do wonder how much nuance is lost though.
Well, that could possibly be. I don't know. Some things I just don't listen to. I've never listened to the audiobook. People tell me they really love the audiobook. But that just freaks me out, so I don't listen.
How did they pick the narrator for the audiobooks anyway?
That was a really interesting process. They sent me audio tapes of about 4 or 5 of one of that voices, and a lot of them were too perky and too bless your heart. And this one woman's voice was lower in register, and I liked it, and I told her, don't try to do a Southern accent in this, just read it. And because it's real Southerners can tell. But it was funny, I've had a lot of people say she sounds like you. And they sent me, the director sent me a list that was like 3 pages long of all these different words, and he made me record. So maybe she's doing me, I don't know. But I haven't.
I have listened.
Yeah.
She's quite good.
Is she?
And I don't think she mispronounces anything important.
That's good. Well, that's because I gave her a spreadsheet, yeah. I gave her a way to do that. But yeah, I've used her both books. Yes. And they came to me with the second one, I said, no, just go with her again. I liked her.
I just happened to read an article about another Southern statue, or actually it was about the Georgia statues that we had sent up to Washington DC, and they were Civil War generals or whatever, and that they should be replaced by more socially, relevant or acceptable. And so, like, what do you think about the whole Confederate statue controversy? Since you brought it up, since I brought it up, you brought it up.
And we
in
are
the whole
recording.
novel.
And we are recording.
Right.
So be
It's like
careful,
the whole
right?
novel,
Do you
right?
think they should be
Yeah.
all replaced or torn down or?
Well, I think the important question that I think is important to ask is, can you put yourself in someone else's shoes? And for our African American brothers and sisters, if you can put yourself in their shoes and look at those statues and think, oh yeah, that's right. I think that's the question to ask. And I think there's a difference between remembering and revering.
Yes.
And that's all I'll say. Anybody else? Other questions?
No, and I asked, but but the good news is the speakers are clear now that the mics are not used, so no to, I think maybe the
So we have to go back and do it over.
reverberation.
Oh, gosh. Should I do another?
Put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Close us
There's
out
a
with
question.
something.
So
So,
Hemingway used to say he would be happy if he could write 1 good sentence a day.
yeah.
What's your daily production and what's your rewriting process?
I just want to get out of my head clearly what I'm thinking. You know, I hate to overuse Flannery O'Connor, but she said, I don't know what I think till I write it down. And I know, as through a glass darkly, I know what I want to say. And it's that struggle to say it clearly. And if I can do that, I like beautiful sentences too. I love language, and I'd love to find the right word to convey the right emotion. But if I can translate my thoughts for myself, then it's been a good day. You know? I mean, if you look down, if I look at something, I go, I'm not saying what I really want to say here. That's the struggle. And when I really do it, that's a good day.
You did a fair amount of rewriting and revision, at least that I was aware of with Muscadines.
I didn't do that much. What they really, I cut a paragraph, I cut a chapter myself that I didn't think, even though I loved it, it was set in Scotland, I loved it, but it didn't advance the story enough. What they asked me to do a lot for Muscadines was add things. They wanted more memories. They wanted more. And I think one thing that they said to me that was illuminating, because a lot of times, to your point, when I was telling you, you have things in your head that you know, like a part of the backstory of a character that gives you a little more depth. It may not be on the page, but it's there. You know that, but the reader doesn't. And so to give them all they need is a challenge. And that's my train of thought.
You were talking about revision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, how old are you? And
Oh my God.
I can look it up on Google I'm sure,
Yeah.
but I'm just wondering if like Delia Owens was in her seventies when she
Yes.
wrote When the
I
Crawdads.
am not
Were
in
the
my
Crawdads-
70s.
And I just wasn't
You're
sure,
nowhere
was that,
near.
Yeah.
was she inspiring? Because that was her first novel, you know.
Actually,
and-
her novel came out right before mine did, so mine was already written. And I'm the same age as Bo Derek. You work it out.
What are you, go ahead, what, have you decided on the name of your third book yet?
What they're wanting to call it is Through an Open Window.
Okay.
We'll see if that sticks.
Okay, is it more of a collaboration on what the title should be?
Oh, it is like.
Okay.
It is the hardest thing.
Tell the
Unless-
story about muscadine.
Well, with muscadines, nobody in New York City knew what muscadines were.
Ah.
And they called it muscadines, and they were very adamant that it not be
Well, the original title was just simply
muscadine.
muscadine.
That was my working title. That's what I had worked on.
Which was beautiful.
I thought it was fine, but that was not. And we went through, I mean, some of the most hellacious titles. And I kept holding out for something that had to do with muscadines, because I thought it was, one, I think it's a beautiful word. And if somebody doesn't know what it is, go look it up. So I went back and I did a sneaky thing, because they were all, all the editors and upstairs and downstairs at Random House were trying to work this out. And I went back in and I wrote just a couple of scenes, just a paragraph where somebody asked the main character, well, what is a muscadine? And she said, they were talking about eating them, and she said, don't eat them until they're ready, because they're so sour. And at the end of the book, she grabbed, and then I'm leaving out tons, but she grabs one and eats it, so it was the sweetest thing I've ever tasted. So I suggested the sweet taste of muscadines, and I was convinced it was going to be called something like Bless Your Heart. And I was out in California with some friends, and the Grand Poobah up the top of Random House had read it through again, and she said, it's got to be sweet taste of muscadines. That was nice. So, yeah. And then this title, When the New Turns Blue, we had gone through a bunch of things too, but I had used that WH on point, once in a while. I can't remember the exact book. And there's a line, once in a while, when the new turns blue. And so I thought, I loved it. So that's good. Yes, ma'am.
Are you sorry that you didn't start writing as a career earlier? Or do you feel like it all led up to be the perfect time for you?
I don't think I had. I've written all my life, and when I did the blog, that was, I was writing every day, just anything I wanted to write. It was really fun. I don't think I would have written the books I wrote had I started earlier. And I loved what I did before. Several of my good friends, one's here tonight, today she's married to one of my oldest friends, and one of the first things he said to me was, why didn't you do this sooner? I wanted to smack him, and I said, well, it happened the way it happened, and I've thought about that, but I don't think I wouldn't have had what I had to say now. So I think it all happens the way it's supposed to happen. I've enjoyed this. Anybody else? Any?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Like if I would envision who the author was
Oh,
of
really?
this book.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
Oh, I think it's
If you want to go back and set up for signing, then we can have Lou close out.
Okay, great.
So Pamela's in the back to
Over
sign.
here.
Pamela's in the back and she's willing to sign either or both of her books for you. Also, we do want to tell you about our upcoming author will be McCracken Poston. It's going to be June 22nd. It will be across the street at the Cultural Arts Center. And it will be 2 p.m. on June 22nd. He's written a book called The Zenith Man. And it's about a trial in the 90s up in Ringgold, Georgia. And it's a really good book too.
It turned out to be really
Yeah,
funny.
It's a good one to listen to, actually. So anyway, thank you all very much for coming. And thank you, Pamela and Alice, and y'all did a wonderful job. Thank you.